Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I do apologise, but I do have a cold. It's been rather, this is the cold season here in Nairobi, and you get these big moves in temperature. I think it's caught me off guard. I hope the week's gone well. It certainly goes fast, doesn't it? I'm going to start with Tennessee Williams' streetcar named Desire. I don't want realism, I want magic. Then I came across this photograph from Harry Fear, Gaza beach filling up with families, more fishers in the shallow waters. And it really is a dreadful situation, and I hope that there's going to be some quiet there now. David Rudisha, who lost to Nigel Amos, a 20-year-old from Botswana in the 800 metres at the Commonwealth Games, told him, "Well done, my brother." How nice. And this morning I got a friend, Wolfgang, who describes his hammock to me most mornings, which is on the lake shore somewhere in Uganda. And it made me think of the Lotos-Eaters by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And I'll just read you one small stanza. There is sweet music here that softer falls than petals from blown roses on the grass, or night dews on still waters between walls of shadowy granite in a gleaming pass. Music that gentlier on the spirit lies than tired eyelids upon tired eyes. Music that brings sweet sleep down from the blissful skies. Here are cool mosses deep, and through the moss the ivies creep. And in the stream the long-leaved flowers weep, and from the craggy ledge the poppy hangs in sleep. Political reflections. The single biggest threat to man's continued dominance on this planet is the virus. That was the Nobel Prize-winning biologist Joshua Lederberg. Some time ago. On that note, I'll put up an image of the Ebola virus and what it's done. Tel Aviv, the United States and UN announced Thursday that Israel and Hamas agreed to a humanitarian ceasefire that is to start Friday morning for 72 hours. However, earlier Israel had vowed to press ahead with its offensive in Gaza, as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his country's military would demolish Hamas's network of tunnels with or without a ceasefire. I'll put up a photograph of Gaza that I found via The Independent. It's difficult to say anything, frankly, because it's a giant prison, and I don't know how this cycle is broken. There is a significant disequilibrium between the two sides, and I think it's an issue of how Israel snaps itself out of what is like a call and response when it comes to Gaza. The post-Arab awakening environment of the Middle East and North Africa is so unsettling and unpredictable that no one knows when the next political storm will develop and what or who will become its next victim. At that point, China has killed suspects in the murder of an Uyghur imam. China says a leading pro-government Muslim cleric in the northwestern territory of Xinjiang was murdered, and police killed 2 suspects and captured another. The state media report on Thursday was the first official confirmation of the murder of Jume Tahir. At dawn on Wednesday, Tahir led the Idkar Mosque in the city of Kashgar and was a strong supporter of government policy on Islam that critics say imposes harsh restrictions. On Monday, the government said a gang armed with knives and axes killed or injured dozens of people in Shache County near Kashgar. Police returned fire, with the death toll estimated to be as high as 200. That's very high indeed. And I spoke about Xinjiang in December 2013 when I said Xinjiang might well morph into China's Afghanistan. On that note, I came across this image of fields of lavender in Xinjiang, China, which I liked. And of course, the architect of the Russian defeat in Afghanistan was Zbigniew Brzezinski, who's now on Twitter and whose photograph I will post. Nick Terse has written a fantastic piece, but it's extremely long. I've been rather naughty and copied and pasted it because I think it's very good. And it's about China and America and a new Cold War in Africa. Is this, talking about Juba, is this country the first hot battlefield in a new Cold War? Is the conflict tearing this new nation apart actually a proxy fight between the world's two top economic and military powers? That's the way South Sudan's information minister, Michael Maku-Luth, tells it. After midwifing South Sudan into existence with billions of dollars in assistance, aid, infrastructure projects, military support, the US has watched China emerge as the major beneficiary of South Sudan's oil reserves. As a result, Makwe claims the US and other Western powers have backed former Vice President Riek Machar and his rebel forces in an effort to overthrow the country's President Salva Kiir. China, for its part, has played a conspicuous double game. Beijing has lined up behind Kiir even as it publicly pushes both sides to find a diplomatic solution to a simmering civil war. It is sending peacekeepers as part of the UN mission, even as it also arms Kiir's forces with tens of millions of dollars worth of new weapons. Experts dismiss Makwe's scenario as far-fetched, as how one analyst puts it. There are average South Sudanese who also believe that Washington supports the rebels. Saying for the last decade, China has used soft power, aid, trade, infrastructure projects to make major inroads on the continent. In the process, it has set itself up as the dominant foreign player here. The US, on the other hand, increasingly confronts Africa as a battlefield or battleground or war, in the words of the men running its operations. In recent years, there's been a substantial surge in US military activities of every sort, including the setting up of military outposts and both direct and proxy interventions. Talking about the US connection with South Sudan, which was through the church in great part, how it broke away from Khartoum, it's really well worth reading in full because Terse writes so well about the continent and he's making some interesting points. But going back to his opening comment about whether it is a proxy war, I said, this was in January 2012, that it seems to me Sudan has become the epicenter of the US and China's collision in Africa, and that we're watching a high-stakes 21st century proxy war. So interesting times. I definitely feel, and as I said to CCTV in June 2012, I think they finally woke up. I don't know when the penny dropped, and that was referencing the US, and in particular referencing the commercial aspect or angle of the US-Africa relationship. I said then, and I think this responds to Terse as well, taking a broader sweep, it is clear that the United States and US-Africa Command has carved out a much more forward position on the African continent. In some respects, Barack Obama's pivot to Asia detours through Africa. China has made a parabolic advance across the African continent, and one of the desired side effects of staunching the Al-Qaeda advance is that it also counters the Chinese advance via the insertion of US hard power. The US cannot challenge China's extreme dollar diplomacy, but it can insert hard power with which it can tilt the African pitch. And then I also referenced the Indian Ocean, and I said, sine qua non of President Barack Obama's pivot to Asia, which talks about distant blockade operations as US and NATO power projection over the Indian Ocean. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of Pemba Island seen from the sky as we flew over it. William Wallace has written an interesting piece about how Africa had high hopes for the presidency of Barack Obama. Not only was he the first African American to reach the White House, but he draws relatives from the continent. Yet Mr. Obama's first term was a disappointment for Africa, with the continent largely absent from the political agenda, and the president spending less than a day there during the whole 4-year period. Now, 2 years into his second term, Mr. Obama is seeking to make up for lost time in the face of strong competition from emerging countries such as China, India, Brazil, eager to build economic links with one of the world's fastest growing regions. It is in recognition of the changing times that the White House has invited 50 African heads of state to Washington next week for the first summit between the US and Africa. Saying this summit is an opportunity, perhaps late, to really show that the US recognizes Africa not only as a recipient of preferential trade, but also as an investment destination, a market in its own right, says Majoro, the Minister of Development Planning in Lesotho. China, of course, has been at the forefront of a purposeful investment drive across the African continent over the past decade and a half, leading to a 20-fold increase in trade to $200 billion in 2013. US trade is about half that, and now, of course, US demand for crude oil out of Africa has cratered as well. Johnny Carson says, we are focused on putting out forest fires, and we should be spending a lot more time planting trees and growing forests, building stronger relationships. That's Johnny Carson. Jennifer Cook, head of Africa at the Brookings Institute, says the US must increasingly compete in Africa for influence and appeal with a new set of emerging powers, influences and ideologies. I said it is difficult to know exactly when the penny dropped, but dropped it has. President Obama was essentially politically hamstrung in his first term in that the US was emerging from a vicious recession, and it would have played very badly at home to be seen to be cavorting on the African stage. Ben Rhodes has previously mentioned that the US corporate sector was sending out a loud signal, array Africa through the noise, and it is evident that the likes of General Electric, Google and others are hard charging and leading this new re-engagement. Now, of course, China looms very large, and dependency on African crude and other raw materials is accelerating. On the other side, the US's dependency on external sources of crude oil has cratered. The pivot to Asia speaks to distant blockade operations, and therefore it brings the Indian Ocean right into geopolitical focus. The US, via its naval dominance, essentially maintains a gatekeeper status over China. The pivot to Asia, therefore, detours through Africa, I said. Howard French, who I'm going to interview early next week, talks of high stakes in Africa. Can the US catch China? And I like this. To be attentive to history is to be on the lookout for pivotal moments. And in the geopolitics surrounding Africa, the 1990s stand out as a hugely pivotal time. I look forward to interviewing him and talking about this article about which is written. And we will post that pretty quickly. Shrapnel-like holes indicating shelling. This is a report that global research is carrying about the MH17. The facts speak clear and loud and are beyond the realm of speculation. The cockpit shows traces of shelling. You can see the entry and exit holes. Then in the photograph, the edge of a portion of the holes is bent inwards. These are the smaller holes, round and clean, showing the entry points most likely that of a 30mm caliber projectile. Dow Jones had its biggest drop since February. I'll put up a 5-day chart. The euro is at 133.86. The dollar is headed for a third weekly gain against the euro, the longest stretch in 2 months, and it's had a pretty punchy run higher this week. Dollar index at 81.50, Japanese yen 102.92. Dollar rose for an 11th day versus the yen, the longest stretch since 2001. Swiss franc 0.9090, pound 168.72, Aussie 0.9290. Little changed, but it has slumped 1.1% this week. The dollar's been pretty broad-based, push higher. India rupee has also softened up 60.845, South Korean won softer 10.3635, Real 226.29, Egyptian pound same as it's been for a long time, 7.1501, and the South African rand at 10.7273. And the dollar strengthened 2.4% actually in the last 4 weeks, the best performer of 10 developed nation currencies tracked by Bloomberg. Yen is up 0.8%, euro down 0.1%. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and this move has been brewing for a while, but it's definitely got some traction and upwards momentum. Euro dollar 133.86. I'll put up a 3-month chart of that. That's now at November lows. Diageo reported full-year earnings. Ivan Menezes, who I met not too long ago last year here, our business has faced macroeconomic and market-specific challenges, he said. Espirito Santo Group, which has called for protection from its creditors, this quote, "The truth is that while the Espirito Santo Group looked solid, it had feet of clay." Commodity markets, gold has lasted 1282.85. I'll put up a 3-month chart. I'm looking for it to fall away to about 1250. Crude oil, $92.01, lowest level in 4 months, and I'm looking to get in here on the long side. Sierra Leone declared a state of emergency and called in troops to quarantine epicenters of Ebola on Thursday, joining Liberia in imposing tough controls to curb the worst ever outbreak of the virus amid fears it could spread beyond West Africa. Ebola has been blamed for 672 deaths in Liberia, Guinea and Sierra Leone, according to the World Health Organization, has also reached Nigeria's biggest city, Lagos. In a measure of rising international concern, Britain on Wednesday held a government meeting on Ebola, which it said was a threat it needed to respond to. IATA said the WHO was not recommending any travel restrictions or border closures due to the outbreak, and there would be a low risk to other passengers if an Ebola patient flew. I'd like to see any other passengers fly with an Ebola patient. The outbreak of the hemorrhagic fever, for which there is no known cure, began in the forests of remote eastern Guinea in February, but Sierra Leone now has the highest number of cases. Liberia has shut schools and considers quarantine to curb Ebola. That took me back to Malcolm Gladwell. A question he was once asked: what does it mean to think about life as an epidemic? Why does thinking in terms of epidemics change the way we view the world? He said, because epidemics behave in a very unusual and counterintuitive way. Think for a moment about an epidemic of measles in a kindergarten class. One child brings in the virus and spreads to every other child in the class in a matter of days, and then within a week or so it completely dies out, and none of the children will ever get measles again. That's typical behavior for epidemics. They can blow up and then die out really quickly. And even the smallest change, like one child with a virus, can get them started. My argument is that it is also the way that changes often happen in the rest of the world. Things can happen all at once, and little changes can make a huge difference. That's a little bit counterintuitive. As human beings, we always expect everyday change to happen slowly and steadily, and for there to be some relationship between cause and effect. And when there isn't, when crime drops dramatically in New York for no apparent reason, or when a movie made on a shoestring budget ends up making hundreds of millions of dollars, we're surprised. I'm saying don't be surprised. This is the way social epidemics work. I'll put up a link from the World Health Organization giving the key facts. Fatality rate of up to 90%. Virus is transmitted to people from wild animals and spreads in the human population through human-to-human transmission. Fruit bats are considered to be the natural host. Introduced into the human population through close contact with the blood, secretions, organs, or other bodily fluids of infected animals. In Africa, infection has been documented through the handling of infected chimpanzees, gorillas, fruit bats, monkeys, forest antelope, and porcupines, found ill or dead, or in the rainforest. I'll put up another diagram which shows that the death toll has now risen to 729. Doctors Without Borders has given warning that the Ebola crisis in West Africa is unprecedented, absolutely out of control. British Red Cross are saying we're sending delegates to Sierra Leone and Liberia to help fight the Ebola epidemic. South African all share fell 0.72% yesterday. It's up 11.11% this year. Dollar rand last trading at 10.7276, but in that range of 10.30 to 10.90 or 11. Egyptian pound, as I said previously, unchanged. Egyptian stock market at a fresh more than 5-year high, up 30.138% this year. Nigerian stock market eased 0.64%. It's up 1.858% this year. Nigeria has the world's deadliest insurgency, killing an average of 24 people per assault versus just 2 in Iraq. Ghana's stock exchange is up 7.226% this year. BBC Africa tweeted Ghana's slumps amid rising inflation. I'll put up the image they tweeted, and have a listen to BBC's Lerato interviewing John Mahama, the Ghanaian president. I wrote about this on the 2nd of June 2014 when I said, look at Ghana, where the president claims he is looking for a homegrown solution to a situation of his making, and frankly there isn't one. I came across this line on the Wall Street Journal. Off the coast of Mozambique, Eni found one of the biggest gas fields ever, enough to meet the demands of all of Italy for 30 years. I wrote in June, Mozambique could be the next Qatar, and indeed it can. Addis Ababa, a very interesting article saying it's all set to be another African hub. This is Bloomberg, predicting the population of Addis Ababa and 5 satellite towns will more than double by 2040 to 8.1 million people. Centum have issued a notice that they're proposing to acquire an additional 66% shareholding in KREP. Their share price has rallied 55.371% this year to fresh record highs practically every session in July. Kenya Commercial Bank have announced an expansion plan as profit climbs. This is Business Week after yesterday's first half earnings release. Our vision is to be in more than 10 countries, Joshua said. We want to have more than 5 million customers by the end of the year. That means getting 2,000 customers daily. This is achievable, he said. Looking to expand into other countries. And I said Kenyan banks have a good understanding of East African markets. East Africa is seen as a growing market, and there are opportunities for oil and gas in particular. Local banks are up close. They're witnessing the growth story, and that's why they're expanding into the region, I said. KCB is Kenya's largest by outlets and units outside the country. Shares closed at 54.50, a fresh record closing high. It's up more than 14% this year. If you want to see the earnings release, it's on Rich Wrap-Ups. We've also videoed the earnings release and put it on YouTube. That is also linked up. I'll put up a link for the photo of Bob tweeting Joshua at that earnings release. The MindSpeak session with Joshua that we did last Saturday is also posted on the website, as is the post-MindSpeak interview I did with him. TPS Serena reported first half earnings. Revenue held up, interestingly enough, 2.711 billion versus 2.92 billion previously. But first half profits were down sharply to 58.247 million versus 205.079 million last time round. EPS of 13 cents a share versus 69 cents a share. Spoke of a challenging business landscape in Kenya, saying Serena Tanzania and Serena Uganda recorded good performances during the period under the review, but the second half is when the peak season hits. That's July to October. They're saying that's at satisfactory levels. I thought these results were better than I had expected. It's a diversified franchise, but sure, coastal tourism is soft, expected to remain so, but there is diversification in this business, and it's worth a great deal more than its current valuation of about $75 million. I spoke to Mahmoud. He was pretty optimistic about the second half, saying that, but thinking the recovery would take longer on the coast, but reckoning that they could, scratch out close to break even versus the previous year. I'll put up a photograph of the sunrise seen from my bedroom in the Polana Hotel in Maputo. I'll put up a photograph of Lake Elmantaita, which is a lovely property they have. A link to an article I read. I said my memories of the Serena started in Mombasa years ago, when the managing director, Mahmoud Jan Mohammed, was the manager. I was then a teenager and remember losing my heart to a girl who would beat me at table tennis in a bikini. you can imagine you're not going to forget that too easily. That table tennis table is still there. The Serena brand has always been sprinkled with fairy dust, and I was talking about what it is, and I think, and I concluded by saying it's established, it's got breadth, it's not a mom and pop operation. Lots of folks are coming after their lunch, but they have longevity, their ability to navigate has been proven, and their DNA makes them a formidable competitor. I'll also put up a photograph I took 1,484 days ago of the pool at the beach at the Serena, which of course now is suffering that because of the coastal issues. I'll put up a photograph of Hannah having a very swanky meal, fine dining at the Polana. The Kenya shilling was at 87.80 last. Nairobi all shares up 11% this year, ticked marginally higher yesterday. NSE 20 closed above 4,900 at 4,906. The market looks as if it's going to push on a little bit here. Finally, it's been a long time coming, I admit. I hope you have a great weekend, and I appreciate the fact that you listened through me and my cold. Thank you.